100 years ago, women were treated very differently than they are today. No provinces in Canada granted women the right to vote yet, and women could not be appointed to the Senate. 5 Canadian women by the names of Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Henrietta Weir Edwards, Louise McKinney, and Nellie McClung put forward a petition called the Persons Case. They challenged the government, stating that women are considered persons too and should be able to sit in the Senate. In 1929, it was declared that women are legally considered persons. These women would be forever known as the Famous Five, the Valiant Five. Welcome to the 20th century. Women in Canadian history. We all had a role to play so that women could be heard today. We're the famous five, the valiant five, the famous five, the valiant five, changing the lives of the sisters, mothers, wives. The famous five, here is why. It's me, I'm Nellie McClung. 1916, fought for women and won. Yes, we could vote, but I wasn't done. The famous five, we made a petition. Are we persons? Could you please clarify? Are we persons? Even if I'm not a guy. 1929, we say you can sit in the Senate if you are a lady. My turn, I'm Emily Murphy. I'm educated and I moved to the prairie. 1916, my political victory. First woman judge, now can we win the battle of the person's case? Oh, it's the person's case. 1929, we say you can sit in the Senate if you are a lady. Oh. Henrietta Weir Edwards, they call me. Women's laws and rights are my expertise. Many years we fought to be a person legally. We're the famous five, the valiant five, the famous five, the valiant five, changing the lives of the sisters, mothers, wives. The famous five, the valiant five, the famous five, the famous five.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Thank goodness for artists. What a beautiful way to pay tribute to the famous five. I look forward to hearing the other song at the end of this conversation. And then, of course, to the whole musical, which maybe will premiere in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So Brianna, Bert, thank you very, very much. And welcome, bienvenue to all of you for joining us from coast to coast today on a Famous Five Friday. Yes, Famous Five Fridays are now starting. And they're very special in the month of October because as of yesterday, October became Women's History Month. And Famous Five Fridays are a day to give us a little extra power, a little extra encouragement, an ability to see opportunities. So fill out your Famous Five Friday by doing something quite wonderful. One of the fabulous things about thinking about Women's History Month is we remember the people who have come before us, who have given us so much, that we can do so much. And certainly that can be said of our Indigenous sisters. This is a land acknowledgement that we are all treaty people and that we are most grateful for the role and the care of a land that our Indigenous sisters and brothers have done over the years. My name is Frances, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Famous Five Foundation and now the chair of the Famous Five Foundation. And on behalf of the directors of the Famous Five Foundation, welcome again and thank you for coming today. These virtual pink teas started 4 or 5 months ago, and today it is presented. It was organized by our Famous Five chapter in Ottawa, led by a superb chair, Beatrice Raffoul. So we're very grateful to Ottawa for bringing forward the virtual pink tea conversation today. And these are national discussions. These are a chance to, again, to think about women's leadership, to think about your leadership, to think how you can become a better leader. In order for the Famous Five and other organizations to participate in society, we need sponsors. And the Famous Five Foundation has been very lucky to have a number of absolutely superb sponsors. Over the past 16 years, Enbridge has sponsored our Enbridge Leadership Lunches, and these have occurred in Calgary, in Ottawa, in Sarnia, in Fort McMurray, and also in Edmonton. So great, deep, sincere thanks to Enbridge for that wonderful contribution, and also for now presenting these virtual pink tea conversations. The Ottawa Famous Five chapter has a number of programs which involve youth. They serve as mentors to a number of young women, so they have the opportunity to learn, to see themselves in a different light, and to have some opportunities to try out things that normally that wouldn't fall within their purview. One of the graduates of the Norton Rose Fulbright Mentee program is with us today. Her name is Sophia Herzog, and she is pursuing education at Carleton University. Well, you understand, not physically there, but pursuing her education because she wants to achieve a master's degree in environmental science. Sophia really appreciates the mentoring that she received during the Norton Rose Fulbright program. And so she returns the favor by being a volunteer for the Ottawa Famous Five chapter, but also mentoring young Ottawans to think about the role that science plays and to become scientists themselves. That's called Let's Talk Science. And so she volunteers on a regular basis to go and talk to elementary school kids, or now does it virtually. And it is my pleasure now to turn the program over to Sophia so that she introduces our two wonderful conversationalists, for which we are very, very grateful. So, Sophia, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome all. It is my pleasure to introducing our conversation today, where we'll be hearing from the Honorable Rona Ambrose, former leader of Canada's official opposition and one of the United Nations 100 impossible to ignore global women leaders. For the past several years, the Ottawa chapter of Famous Five has recognized women across the country as nation builders, acknowledging them as outstanding role models, leaders, mentors, and inspirations to their communities. The Ottawa chapter of Famous Five wishes to recognize Ms. Ambrose with the honor of Nation Builder, as she upholds the continued legacy of the 5 women leaders who championed the person's case, forging a path forward for all women. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Ambrose today. As you've heard, I work and study in the field of science, an environment where women are not equally represented. And as such, today's female leaders inspire me greatly. They truly are representative of the importance of equal representation of women in leadership positions. The Honorable Ms. Ambrose has had a diverse career in politics. At the time of her appointment to cabinet, she was the youngest female cabinet minister in Canadian history, and since went on to serve in 9 ministerial roles. Ms. Ambrose has recently been appointed as Deputy Chairwoman of TD Securities, and TD is the sponsor of the successful Famous 5 Ottawa outreach program, the Lunch and Learn at Youville Centre. In her time as minister responsible for the status of women, Ms. Ambrose sponsored a resolution proposing the International Day of the Girl. Ratified by the United Nations, it is now recognized around the world. Her passion for women's rights and gender equality is demonstrated by her ongoing advocacy work and public policy work. She currently sits on the board of directors of Plan International Canada, promoting social justice for young girls in developing countries. Having recently launched the nonprofit #SheLeads, Ms. Ambrose works to inspire women to follow in her political footsteps and co-chairs the She Leads Economic Council of Alberta. She is a proponent of equal matrimonial rights for Indigenous women in Canada and has supported the creation of a refugee program to bring enslaved Yazidi women to Canada. An authentic trailblazer for gender equality as well as the rights of women, Ms. Ambrose is an excellent example of a nation builder. And with her today is former award-winning reporter and public relations executive, Susan Murray. Susan has worked for the CBC as a political commentator and foreign correspondent in Washington, D.C., Asia, Africa, South America, and Europe. Certainly 2 very inspiring women. Susan, please begin.
Well, thank you, Sophia. That is just great. And welcome to everybody. Bienvenue, Megwich. It is so wonderful to be able to be here to honor Rona Ambrose as a nation builder and as a champion for the rights of women and girls. And I noticed, Rona, I noticed right from the beginning that you were an activist and a feminist. You took your first degree in gender and women's studies. You were working in women's shelters and women assault clinics or whatever. Where did you go from there to take that giant step to run for parliament? What motivated you?
Yeah, I was an activist. I was one of those people that held up a banner in front of the provincial legislature and wrote letters to the government. And, you know, it's funny to then sit on the other side of the table and receive those letters. I think I realized that we need all of it. We need activists and we need people inside the system, part of the system, to change the system. And I felt at one point, I remember meeting with someone and thinking, I want to be on that side of the table so I can actually make those decisions. I was advocating for a change in a policy. And I said to myself, I want to make the policy. How do I do that? How do I get on the other side of this table so I have more authority, more power, more influence? And that's what led me to politics. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a politician. It was really never in my plan. But as I became more active, more interested in issues, I started to be more exposed to the system, which I think happens to a lot of young activists, and then realizing that I wanted to get into the system so I could make change.
Who were your mentors or role models? Or maybe there weren't even all that many back then.
Well, you know, that's interesting because I think I've had a lot of, I'm not afraid to ask for help. And I'm a big believer in showing vulnerability when you are on your way up and even when you're at the top as a leader. I think it's really important to tell people you need help, ask for help when you need it. And I've always had no problem reaching out to others and saying, what should I do here? Give me some good advice. So I've had so many mentors in my life, from teachers to professors to people in industry, men, women, you know, my grandmother, my mother. I've been very lucky and I'm a big believer in mentorship. But, you know, it's interesting because there came a time in my career in politics where I didn't have anyone to phone. I didn't know who I could talk to about something that was going on because there wasn't anyone else above me that was a woman. And so I phoned a friend and I said, do you know Kim Campbell? And she said, I sure do. And so I got her number and I phoned her. And you know what? That's what I needed right then. I needed someone that had been in that world as a woman. And I had a really great candid conversation with her. So I just really encourage young women to reach out to people. I think mentoring is one of the most important things that people can do for young women.
I was kind of curious, like you spent a lot of your childhood outside of Canada in kind of exotic places like Brazil and Egypt or whatever. Did that inform you in any way as far as your thinking on women's rights and leadership?
Oh yeah, absolutely it did. Absolutely. It did, because growing up in third world countries, I mean, my father had a good job, we had privilege and we were okay. But being exposed to so many things that I saw, girls not being able to go to school, girls that couldn't even, just walking to school was courageous. The gender violence, gender discrimination, not having the same rights as other women and girls in other countries, particularly in Canada, where I was from. I knew what it could be, and just the amount of social injustice, it left a lasting impact on me. And I think that's part of what propelled me to always look beyond Canada and think about the girls that are outside of our country, and always encouraging young people to be global citizens. I mean, International Day of the Girl was really about that, thinking about what can we do to help girls in other countries to lift up their situations, whether we're advocating for changes in laws or we're supporting important development projects. But yes, it had a big impact on me. Absolutely.
In politics, as you know, it's not all sweetness and light for women. I think
What?
I think you said once that Twitter was a sewer for women, and you also talked at one time of opening a cosmetic company so that you could put on makeup. The thicker it got, the tougher you were. So can you kind of give us some insights in what it was like to be that young woman on Parliament Hill?
It's tough. You know what? It's really tough. I mean, we've seen really impressive, strong women resign from politics because of the abuse they take online. I actually stopped looking at my Twitter account. And sometimes I feel guilty saying that, because people say, well, but I sent you a message. You know, rest assured, I saw messages that were supposed to be sent to me. But the reality was, all of the filth that came my way was filtered out by someone else. And it became so toxic of an environment that I realized that it impacted my judgment, and it just started to impact me. And so very early on, I divorced myself from Twitter, and I gave that to my staff, and I let them manage it. And I've given that advice to all women in politics. You don't need to see 99% of what comes your way. Someone can give you a good briefing on what you're missing, and help tweet your messages out. But the reality is, I actually just deactivated my Twitter account in the last month. And I said right to Twitter Canada, and I've said it to people in high office at Twitter, that Twitter is a sewer. It's an absolute sewer for women in politics. And I know that they have tried to do some things to clean it up, but they have not done enough. And it's getting worse. And young women experience, even ones that aren't in politics, experience so much harassment and negativity online. It's, I think that it affects how they see themselves. I think it affects, we already know about body image issues, but it affects their identity, it affects their confidence. And I just worry, because their lives are so much more online than mine was when I was a young girl. And, it can be a very toxic environment.
So social media aside, was there any problems in the face-to-face encounters that you had on a daily basis on Parliament Hill? Because you were a young chick.
Well, I could write a book on unconscious bias. I always chalk it up to that. I think most people really aren't, I really don't think it's ill-intended, but lots of times I would go to meetings where people didn't actually recognize me. They would walk right by me and shake my male assistant's hand, saying, "Nice to meet you, Minister." And I'm like, "I'm over here." Or, the first time I went into the House of Commons, I walked into the front door and I had all my books with me. And I walked in and the security guard just stood in front of me and put his hand out like this. And he said, "Young lady, where do you think you're going? This door is only for members of parliament." And I said, "Well, I'm a member of parliament." And he sort of looked shocked and he said, "I'm sorry, you don't look like a member of parliament." And maybe then I didn't. And he apologized and apologized and he never forgot my face again. But I can tell you, I can tell you another story. I was waiting for the Secretary of Energy for the US. And I'm sitting in a room and these two big Secret Service guys come barreling into the room and they say, "Little lady," they sounded like they were Texans, "Little lady, you need to get out of this room because there's a really important meeting in here between the Minister of Environment for Canada and the Minister or the Secretary of Energy for the United States." And I sort of paused and I said, "Well,
That's me.
I'm the Minister of Environment for Canada." And of course they did, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." But again, it's just unconscious bias. But I could write a book on how many times things like that happen to
You
me.
should.
Yeah, maybe I should. But the point is that if people can't see you as a minister, they can't see you in a leadership role, you don't look like they think you should look. It leads to so many other biases that happen in your life, right? And that starts to break down your confidence and breaks down, your identity as a leader. So when people, sort of roll their eyes at unconscious bias training, I always say, you have to do this because people just don't realize how much of it they have until they're on the other side, experiencing some of it.
And most of the time talking about your career and your motivations and your recommendations to people today. But just as an aside, you mentioned Kim Campbell, and we all know what happened to Hillary Clinton, and we all know what happened to Kim Campbell. And at one time there were 5 female premiers, and we go right through them: Christy Clark, Rachel Notley, Kathleen Wynne, Pauline Marois, and Dunderdale. Not a single one was reelected. What does that say to us?
It'll be interesting to do an analysis to when they took over the leadership, because, like with Kim, it was sort of almost like she had to pick up the pieces, right? And the party wasn't in good shape. And I don't know, Christy Clark has got to be one of the most effective retail politicians in the history of Canada. There's no doubt in my mind. And so, I guess the one positive is we know people will vote for women. We know they will because they have. But yeah, I think a part of the problem is then making sure that we have more women step forward. A bit of what happens is women see how other women are treated. Mm-hmm. And then they don't necessarily want to put their hand up when it's time for a leadership race. So, there's still lots of work to do, but we do know that Canadians are in all parts of the country are willing to vote for a woman. And I think that gives me a lot of reassurance.
So in bouncing back from some of the things you faced, talk to me about resilience. What did you do to keep calm and carry on?
Yeah, I think, I think courage comes in a lot of different forms. And back to what you said about growing up, I think, there's girls that just walking to school is courageous. So when people say, "Wow, what you did was courageous," I think, well, that's a real compliment. But for me, I've always just thought of it as, I grew up in a family where I felt valued, and I always was encouraged to take risks. And I'm a big believer in encouraging young women to take risks, even small ones. Even women in the corporate world are afraid to put up their hand and ask a question in the boardroom, or even in a room full of, colleagues. And I always say, don't be afraid to take up room and take up physical space. Men sort of sit on their chair like this and their hands over, and women kind of sit like this. And by the time they ask the question, somebody else already has, and they're waiting nervously to ask that question. And that's just a small, tiny risk. But then it's a risk, big risks, to start a new job, or, put yourself out there very publicly, or leave a very difficult situation. All of those are hugely courageous things to do. But I do think we need to find a way to really encourage our young women to feel comfortable with failure. there's this sense that, you know, we have to be perfect in so many ways. And I've always said to myself, I always had this motto, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, really? What is the worst thing that can happen when I'm looking at what I want to do next? And it's failure, right? Of course. Like, well, you might fail. It may not work out, but I just think, so what? I mean, so what? You get to pick up the pieces and start again. And in the meantime, you've learned a bunch about yourself. You've probably met a bunch of great people. And it's another experience to chalk up in your, you know, in your life. And so, but we've got, I think that failure builds resilience, and learning to be okay with failure is important. Otherwise you won't take a risk. And believe me, you're never going to run for office if you're not willing to take a risk. But I have not met one woman who has regretted running for office, including all the ones who lost. They've loved their experiences. And so I always tell them that story. But I do have to say, you know, Susan, when I talked, because I do a lot of work trying to promote women to public office and public life. And when I talk to young men and women, there's such a difference in confidence, because I'll meet a young woman who's fantastic and I'll say, wow, you know, you have such a passion for women's issues or for homelessness, and I think you should run for office. We really need someone like you with your voice and passion. And they'll say, you know what, first I've got to get my MBA, and then I'm going to work in the corporate world for 10 years. And then I think I better, and they list all these things. And I say to them, but no, you're ready right now. What you need is your voice and your passion for this issue. We need you in Parliament. And then I'll ask a young guy who's great too, you know, wow, you're great. You should think about it. And the young guy will say, where do I sign up? Like, sign me up. I'm ready.
So the obstacle is not so much childcare, it's more courage.
It's confidence. I think there's a confidence gap that we see in young girls and young guys. And I just feel like we have to do more to, as much as we can, to fill that. And that comes with mentorship, work like you're doing, exposing Sophia. She's a young, great leader in her own right, exposing her to great mentors, like at the Famous Five. I just think all of those things make a difference. I mean, we all know that there could have been one person in our life, a teacher, a parent, a friend, that made all the difference. It could be just one person. And so I think we have to think of it that way, that we should all be trying to be strong mentors to young women.
I don't want to go over your entire career. Sophia did a pretty good job of it. We could spend a whole hour just mentioning all the things you've done, because you had 9 different portfolios. That's just awesome, from environment and labor and status of women, and of course, leader of the opposition. But through all that, what are you proudest of?
Oh, you know what? I'm so lucky to have had a chance to do a lot of interesting things. And I think the International Day of the Girl was fun because it was a team effort with a group of girls, and it was really for them. It was, you know, using my influence and my power and my voice, but it was really them that pushed it. And it was just so fun because they were just, we can't believe this actually happened. It was just such a fun thing to be a part of. And now it's celebrated around the world. And you know, just to see the impact you can have on a young group of women, and to show them that their impact could, you know, that their voices could make such a difference. They lobbied, they worked hard at it, and then they found someone that would really carry their voices for them in a way that I could. I was just a little piece of it, but really it was such a great experience for them, and it made me feel, you know, very proud to be able to support them.
Oh,
and of
Rona,
course, meeting the Pope was really interesting too. You know, you get to meet a lot of famous people like Bono from U2, and we met the Pope. And I've got to tell you this funny story, another unconscious bias story. So I got to meet him privately in this room in the Vatican, which is highly unusual. So it was very, very special. And even though I'm not Catholic, but it was a very interesting thing to get to be a part of. And we went in there, and it happened to be his birthday, and I speak Portuguese. So I was saying happy birthday to him in Portuguese, and we're having a little visit. And there was a photographer there taking all these photos because, of course, there was this minister from Canada meeting the Pope. So lo and behold, a few weeks later, the photos come back to my house, and they're all from the angle of the Pope with my husband. I didn't make it into any of the photos because they thought the photographer was just told that the Pope's meeting with the minister from Canada. So the photographer took all the photos of my husband with the Pope. It was hilarious.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so I have that picture up so that I can remind myself of those kinds of things.
And even when you were in opposition, I was quite interested when you brought in a private member's bill that everybody seemed to support on trying to give education to judges about sexual assault. Whatever happened to that? Did it make a difference?
It has made a difference. The judges that we really need to educate on this issue are mostly at the provincial level. And so we have now, it's been introduced in PI and in Saskatchewan, and Alberta is thinking about it as well. So that's great. The bill has been introduced now for the third time by the Justice Minister last week in the House of Commons. It was unanimously supported by all parties. So let's hope that this time it gets through. Basically, it ran into the challenge of people who think that the justice system does not ever need to be reformed in any way. And, you know, Kim Campbell, you know, I went to her first because she wrote the law on sexual assault. And we talked a lot about it, and we came to the conclusion, and I completely agree, that the law is good. The law is excellent. It's one of the best in the world. The issue is not that, it's the application of the law. It's that some judges make mistakes in the courtroom. Some defense lawyers make mistakes. Some prosecutors make mistakes, but really judges make mistakes in how they apply the law. And that has very, very serious consequences when it comes to something as serious as sexual assault. So my bill just says that judges need to be trained in sexual assault law. That's it. They just need to understand it and know it. And then it also involves them learning about stereotypes and bias, which, by the way, is also covered in the law, but it's something that we need to underscore. And, you know, there it sits. Let's hope it passes. It's definitely needed. It's supported by many women's groups and you know, even chief justices of some of the provincial systems. So thank you for bringing it up. But we're still fighting the fight after 4 years.
And I'm sure you will succeed. What does the word leadership mean to you?
I think, wow, you know, when I think it means, to me, I think of it of ownership and accountability, responsibility, duty. Those are the kinds of things that come to my mind. I think there's lots of things that come out of that, but for me, I think anyone can take a leadership position in so many different ways in their communities. It doesn't have to be high profile in public. I mean, it can be in their schools, in their classrooms, the university campuses, you know, and that's what we need. We need people to have a sense that they can be accountable and own something and really take, you know, really not just advocate for something, but feel like they're, I guess what I'm thinking about is when you take ownership of something, just feel like they're contributing and that they're valued. So, I mean, those are all just words that come to mind for me.
Because one of the reasons I ask it, like, there are a lot of questions that we did get from viewers, and a couple of them asked, what would you recommend to my daughter?
Yeah.
So that she can show leadership and political acumen. So what would you say to that young girl?
Well, I think expose her to things, expose her to people that are in leadership roles that you think that she should be exposed to, whether it's Sophia in sciences or people that are in public life. If her daughter happens to be interested in politics, then I would take her to events to listen to people speak. Not partisan events, but people speak about policy and democracy. I think that find a mentor, maybe she can have lunch with someone and ask them questions about politics if she's interested in it. You know, I think demystify the whole thing for her. So, and put her in front of people. I mean, one thing we've done with our kids is put them in front of people to speak. And it's really hard for, you know, public speaking is terrifying, but there's something about just standing up and having to say things in front of people. Like it builds confidence. And you have to own your voice and really feel accountable for your voice because everyone's watching you. And so do it in ways that are comfortable for her. But if you can, even if she gets up and does a toast at the family dinner table one night or something.
That's what we believe at, you know, at in the famous five, that you're not at the back of the room writing the notes, but you're at the front of the room actually doing the address. And I'm wondering also, when you set up the She Leads Foundation, it's not just politics where we need female leaders right now.
It's everywhere. And, you know, I'm really worried about what's happening with COVID because, you know, there was some research that came out this week that said 1 in 3 women in the corporate world are thinking about leaving their jobs. And I, you know, we're just so good at managing a lot. But I think I'm really worried about what this is going to look like because there are so many women that have been mentored and have worked so hard in their careers, and they've got such a burden on them right now. They're taking care of parents who can't get out of the house as much as they would like to. Their kids have to be schooled at home. They don't have the same formal support systems. If their kid gets sick, you know, they're pulled out of school and tests aren't always available right away. And then, you know, it's a lot for young moms to deal with. And then on top of that, you're supposed to be in the office, performing, advancing, you know, it's a lot of pressure. And, you know, I think that companies are going to have to think a lot about what do we do to keep those women on that track, because everyone's working so hard to create female leaders in the corporate world, but there's a huge impact on women, and that's in the corporate world. Let's not even, you know, we think about the impact of COVID on face-to-face type service sector industries. I mean, those jobs have been decimated, and women are the majority of those jobs.
So what can be done about that? If you were in power right now, what do you think is one thing that could be done for this so-called almost she-cession, which some people call it a she-recession?
Well, I think that the financial supports that are in place are really good and necessary, and we've got to get them out the door, and that happened really fast, and I think that's excellent. But I do think that we need to take a really hard look very quickly at how this has impacted women. People are talking about daycare, but nobody really quite knows what to do with that because, you know, daycares have COVID in them. So where do you send your kid? So we have to be really creative. And then you know, for me, it also gets down to really good screening and testing. I mean, there's places in the world where they're testing kids, you know, a 10-minute test, every kid that walks through the school door, every kid that walks through the daycare, so that moms know kids are safe. Okay, now I can go to work. So I think we have to have a lot more rapid testing, a lot more screening, so that places like daycares and schools are safe places for kids to go. Moms can get to work. You know, that, you know, we need to support those formal support systems that were there and then just disappeared like that when the pandemic showed up.
Do you have any comments at all? It's not just the pandemic. The pandemic is certainly the overwhelming thing right now. But in an era of Black Lives Matter and racialized Canadians, what would you say to those girls, Black girls or minority, refugee girls, so that they succeed in our society?
Well, I think that is, I mean, even a more important area for us to focus on. The same thing in the sense that, I mean, this is a time for them to be encouraged to use their voices. I mean, there's different times when things happen in our society, and this is one of those moments where we really have to be allies, and we really have to encourage young women, young Black women, young Indigenous women too, to be able to speak out, to be welcomed in organizations. I mean, let's face it, feminist organizations have long been accused of being, you know, too white, too privileged, and not diverse enough. You know, we can't be like that. I know the famous five is not like that, but we've got to make sure that we have, you know, share those platforms and give those platforms to, you know, women in the Black community. And again, it gets back to great mentors and mentorship programs, opportunities for young women to take the stage. And you guys are doing a lot of those kinds of things.
We're trying. Who are your political heroes, or maybe heroes of any kind?
I mean, of course, there's always the people say, well, Margaret Thatcher, because I'm a conservative, but, you know, I just think I'm a a big, I take a lot of direction and, confidence from just a lot of regular people I've met. There's just amazing people. I think of my grandmother. She went to university in Edmonton. That was not normal at that time. She was a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. Not easy. She had a career her whole life. She started a school for Indigenous kids, Aboriginal kids in the community because there wasn't school for them. I think there's just so many amazing women out there doing things in their communities. And I find that inspiring. I really do.
What about any of the members of the Famous Five? Do you identify with any of them?
Well, I always love Nellie Klung because she just seems really feisty. They're all amazing. They're all amazing.
And they're all Albertans. They were all Albertans.
I know. I mean, we take ownership of them. That's for sure. But there's a spirit of pioneering here in Alberta, I think, and that's so the Famous Five doesn't surprise me. Like there's a lot of women that age who worked side by side with their husbands on the farm and were owners and operators of the farms, and you can just see how that mentality could have evolved here because of just the nature of the economy being very agricultural. And I just, I love Nellie McClung has that quote about, I've never thought about minding my own business because as much, or how does she say it? I'll read it. I've never thought minding my own business is much of a virtue. Too often it's just an excuse for not taking action. So I love that quote by Nellie McClung.
We in Ottawa really like the quotes of our old mayor, Charlotte Whitten, who said women have to be better to be equal, but luckily that's difficult.
You know what? It's interesting. Before I ran for office, I talked to an MP who was a woman. And I said to her, people are encouraging me to do this. What advice do you have? And she said, you should do it. She said, but you should be prepared that you're going to need to know twice as much as the guy beside you to be thought of as equal. And I just thought, oh, well, that's maybe her experience, but thanks anyway, But then I got there and she was right. She was right. There was just a natural inclination to see the men as the political leaders. So the women just had to just really always be on top of their files, know everything really well. I mean, I just saw it, I saw guys falling asleep in cabinet meetings. If I would have been falling asleep in a cabinet meeting, I wouldn't have got promoted or I wouldn't have another cabinet seat. So I just think there's still a perception issue to be dealt with. But
is it getting better, Rona? I mean, have we come a long way, baby, as they say?
Yes.
I think it's getting better in that, as much as social media is really toxic for women, the women are speaking out more. I think that's helpful. I think sometimes these movements that happen, people are more connected, and I think that's helping because whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or what happened around Harvey Weinstein and sexual assault in general, I mean, it just makes, when people feel more connected, they feel more willing to speak up. It's just the way it is. And so I think that's made things better. For women, we feel more connected with each other, and we have to continue to do that because it's not easy to speak up in a lot of situations. So we do have to encourage each other to come forward if there's something that needs to be said.
We have. I was wondering if we were getting any questions from viewers right now. I'm not seeing them, which really proves that this is live. But we had taped one question that comes from our friend here in Ottawa. So maybe we could play the clip from Sheila Gervais.
Miss Ambrose, how important to the future of Canada and what positive outcomes can you describe that would stem from its achievement is gender balance in our legislatures?
Great question. That's a great question. I think You know, it's interesting because a lot of women have these debates about gender representation versus gender representation. You know, are you just seeing a woman, she may not represent your views or values, but just actually seeing her in office, sitting there in the legislature is actually helpful because you're seeing a woman in office. So there's these theoretical debates about representation versus actual representation, where you're voting someone in that is representing your values, your views, your politics. And they both matter, I think, to the landscape of legislatures. I think that it's also interesting that a lot of women want to believe, and I've seen it over my political career, that there's just no difference. They do not want to admit that there's any difference between a male politician and a female politician, that we bring exactly the same thing. And I'll argue that we could compete on an equal playing field, and we're just as strong and tough and all those things. But I don't believe that we bring the same issues to the table, because I've been around that table and I've seen what happens when there's a couple extra women in the room and you bring up an issue that's related, that's a woman's issue, and then another woman will pick it up, and then another one will pick it up. And all of a sudden it's an issue and we're talking about it instead of just, oh, okay, thanks for that. So, and it's not because no one cares about women's issues, it's because it's our lived experience and we bring that with us. And it's in whether it's, you know, some of the issues we're talking about with caregiving, I mean, there's many different areas. And so, yes, I do think it matters. It matters a lot. And it also matters that we see ourselves in the legislature. We're half the population. We're starting businesses at record rates. You know, we're a huge part of the economy. We absolutely should see ourselves in the legislature. And why is that not happening? Lots of different reasons, but yes, I think it makes a big difference. And it makes a difference to people like Sophia, who are looking at the legislature and thinking, is that a place for me? Like, is that where I want to go? Are they talking about the things I care about? I you know, doesn't have to be a woman necessarily, but I know that as a young woman, when I saw women, I thought, oh, it just made me go, well, I could do that too. You know, that's something I could do. So absolutely, it makes a big difference. And it makes a difference in the types of issues that are raised. And I know people, you know, well, I've had these arguments with people where they say, you know, but you're stereotyping issues, you say women raise these kinds of women's issues. And I say, well, it's just the reality, because the majority of our lives still involve, yes, we own businesses, you know, yes, we're a big part of the economy, but we also still have bear a lot of the caregiving in this country. We still do the majority of the volunteer work in our communities. I could go on and on. So that lived experience, we're still the majority of activists in a lot of organizations across the country. That lived experience has to be at the table.
Rona, we're almost running out of time, but I wanted to spend a minute or two, the final minute or two, talking about your life now. You've just taken on a big job at Toronto Dominion. You have the She Leads Foundation. What is your dream for the future? What's next for you?
Oh my gosh. Just to keep working hard on issues that matter to me and to others that I've loved working with. I think there's a lot, you know, I know we're very fortunate in Canada to have a country where we at least have a legal framework of equality, but we're not there yet with a lot of issues. And I worry a lot about this confidence gap between young women and girls. I want to help close that in whatever way I can. I want to work with women in business. I want to work with women in public office, women that are in the nonprofit sector, and just support some of the great initiatives going on across the country to really help support that leadership drive in young women like Sophia. That's what we need to do so that we do have those leaders for tomorrow.
And can you talk really quickly about your book that's coming out next week?
Yeah. So I told you a little bit about International Day of the Girl, which was such a great thing to be a part of. And a friend of mine, Jessica D. Humphreys, who is a wonderful children's author, her and I collaborated on this book called International Day of the Girl, Celebrating Girls Around the World. And it is stories of 9 girls and their challenges and how they overcame them. Some of them are pretty tough things to talk about, like child marriage, you know, needing access to a washroom when you have your period or you can't go to school, like different things that girls deal with in different countries. And of course, the Canadian girls. So we had to, of course, have a girl from Canada, and that is Sokanen, and she's an Indigenous girl. And it tells the story of how she fought for a school for her community. And that's based on the real life story of Shannon Costigan from the Attawapiskat First Nation. And the proceeds go to a charity that does work for girls equality, which is called Plan International Canada. So thank you for asking about it. It's one of those practical tools to teach boys and girls about gender equality, but also to teach them about what happens outside of Canada. And there's a lot of being a global citizen. Kids need to understand, you know, what challenges other kids have in other parts of the world. There's lots of kids that have no rights and lots of girls that don't know what equality means. And so there's lots of work that they can do to support kids in other parts of the world as well.
Well, Rona, I really want to thank you for your inspiration today. I think we're all ready and anxious now to get out there and change the world. And I'll now send it back to Frances Wright.
Thanks, Susan.
Well, thank you very much, Rona. I love this conversation. It was spectacular. And I know we haven't discussed this ahead of time, Rona, but a couple of questions for you. What was that first change that you were advocating for? Please tell us. Do you remember?
Well, interestingly, now I'm gonna.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, Rona, I'm so.
Oh, it's okay. I haven't thought about this in a long time.
Aw. Take your time.
It was it's just
Shoulders back. Deep breath.
big deep
Okay.
breath. It was advocating to change the law around sexual assault and
Yes.
how victims are treated in the courtroom.
Yes. Good. And as a result, changes have been made, Rona. So you spoke
Yes.
out at a key time.
I did, but it took 25 years for
Yeah.
us to actually put a law in place. And well, we still don't have a law, but it's interesting because it just goes to show how long it takes to make change. But back then it was much, much worse. I used to sit in court and listen to
Oh,
how victims were treated and take notes. It was a particular program called the court monitoring program. And the way victims were treated was unspeakable. But there are still things like that happening in our courtrooms, even coming from judges. And the way that, you know, you saw the Gladu case, the way that she was treated by the judge and others in terms of how the names she was called as an Aboriginal woman. So we still have work to do.
we still have work to do. And thanks to leaders like you, we're keeping at it. And I think that's the message. We're not going away. These things mean a great deal to us, and we're going to persevere and make sure it happens. And because, as you say, as we get more women involved, these issues rise to the top and they get dealt with, or the issue is there and it's dealt with finally the way we want it. And
yeah, that's right. You have to keep at it.
Absolutely. Well, you certainly are a trailblazer and a nation builder, Rona.
Oh, thank you.
Very, very impressive. It's been interesting to watch your career as a young MP and then a minister. And I guess I'm sort of hoping, like a lot of other people, that you will become active in politics again after your very successful leadership time at TD. But I don't want you back as leader of the Conservative Party. So sorry. I want you back, and I want you to follow in the initiative of the Famous Five, to be a senator, to speak out in that. Would that be something you would be interested in?
Maybe one day. I'll have to think about it, but thank you. I mean, I just want to, keep working on what I'm working on. It's a brand new challenge, and I love what's associated with challenges. And maybe the Senate will be one of those challenges. God knows they need some reform in that place too.
Yes. Well, luckily, these independent senators have been a really good way to change.
Have.
Do you agree?
Yeah, they have.
Yes. And now you simply apply to be a senator. So I'm sure that's something you can do, and you would certainly get lots of letters of recommendation
That's common.
for you being there. Very good luck with your time at TD. And as you know, so many of your new colleagues have joined us today from right across Canada. And I believe we even have a couple of your TD buddies from the US that came to cheer you
Hi,
on.
TD buddies.
Yeah, fantastic. And our thanks to TD also for sponsoring a program with the Famous Five Ottawa chapter as well. And what a pleasure it was to see Susan, such a pro, Susan, in your delivery of the questions, and you listened to Rona, and then you asked follow-ups. And I'm just sort of wondering, Susan, having gone through the process of being a journalist for 25 years, what are the changes you see for women in journalism?
Well, certainly there are a lot more of them now. When I started, there were very, very few. I mean, we're going back to the old ages. I'm certainly a senior, and back then there were hardly any. When I was a foreign correspondent, there were hardly any. So I think now there has been, in fact, it might be one of the professions where we've reached a gender equality. Certainly in the journalism schools, I think it's one place where women can thrive. And it's been very, very positive to see.
So what did you think about today's interview, in that you weren't after hard news?
Oh, I could switch to hard news in a heartbeat. I mean, there were so darn many questions, Rona, about, are you going to go back to politics, and we want you to run for prime minister? And I didn't even want to go there, because you can make your decisions as you go along. I think you're just making such a heck of a difference right now, the way it is. And when you see what's going on in the political world, like the debates that went on last week between Biden and Trump, you would wonder why any women would want to get into that cesspool.
No, that's exactly why women need to get in. Exactly why, without a doubt. Please don't discourage anybody. I agree with Rona. Being in politics is a phenomenal experience, and you meet incredible people, and just a few duds. But women have to step up more.
They have to step up, and they have to have a sense of humor, I think.
Oh yeah, you have to have a really thick skin and a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
Right. Well, again, so much thanks from the bottom of our heart, Rona, to you. And we want you to know that the Famous Five Ottawa chapter is making a donation to Plan International.
Oh, thank you.
On your behalf. And we did show you the cover of your book, and I'm told that the website for people who want to immediately order, although it's only starting to be available on Sunday, is www.internationaldayofthegirl.com. internationaldayofthegirl.com. And I'm sure a book will be out to you in no time. Or how about 5 books? Everybody buy 5. 5 books, right? And do you agree, Rona? And then pass them around?
I'm hiring you as my agent. Thank you. And thank you so much to the Famous Five Foundation for this honor. I love what you do and what you stand for. I love the Famous Five. They've been an inspiration my whole life. And thank you to the sponsors. And thank you for the work you're doing, Francis, and your team, for keeping going. It's really important for everyone who tuned in. Thank you very much also.
Well, I appreciate that very much. So thank you, Rona. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Sophia. Thanks to Enbridge and TD for being with us today. And now I'm just going to talk for a moment and let the others relax. Bring you news, 5 pieces of news. So first of all, a week ago, an amazing woman in the United States died, who has given credit to Canadian suffragists and Canadian legislators for bringing the value of women forward in laws of equality and opportunity. So if you have a glass or a coffee cup, I ask you to raise a toast to RBG, to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. To Ruth. Thank you. And I invite you all to come back on October No, I'm not going to invite you to come back. On October the 18th, so what's that? 16 days time, it will be the 91st anniversary of the person's case. And we want all of you to invite 4 people to come Zoom with you or to meet outside and have your own virtual pink tea or your own pink tea and do some of the things that Rona suggested. There's lots of issues. She identified them and she told you to take action. So please get together on October 18th, the 91st anniversary. And maybe one of the things you can think about is, what do we want to do either by or for the 95th anniversary of the person's case, which happens on October 18th in 2024. So send us your ideas. Thirdly, on November 6th, it will be another Famous 5 Friday, although I think all Fridays are Famous 5 Fridays, but another virtual pink tea. And at that time, we'll be featuring Jennifer Hallett, who is now the executive director of The Walrus, a superb source for Canadian journalism. Previously to joining The Walrus, Jennifer worked as the head of news and government relations for Twitter Canada. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for Jennifer about that as well. And no doubt she will weave in maybe some of the answers to your statements, Rona, because she will see this interview. But it's important that we talk about women in tech, women in media, women in leadership, women in politics. And interviewing her will be Tara Weber, a longtime CBC, well, she's still a young person, a CBC reporter who for the last 5 years has been the Western Canadian correspondent for BNN Bloomberg. So that's on November 6th. Fourth thing to do, please donate to the Famous 5 Foundation. You have heard a wonderful endorsement by our conversationalists today. We need to keep working to empower girls and women and to tell the story of the Famous 5 and other Canadian women who built Canada. And please remember, they weren't perfect, and I'm not perfect either. Also, they didn't know then what we know now. And so we can only speculate that if they knew then what we know now, they might have said and done some things differently. But let's also ask ourselves, what are we doing today? What are we saying and believing today that won't withstand the test of time? So in context. And so the last thing is the Famous 5 pledge. In reading Emily's book and looking through a diary, we came across her description of her visit to Parliament Hill in 1924-25. She was in Ottawa and she saw the new statue to Queen Victoria. And that night she wrote in her diary, "I know this is good art, for it causes me to stand erect and to feel myself equal to high and splendid braveries." And so we've taken just part of that, the "I feel equal to high and splendid braveries," and used it as our pledge. And when you think of high and splendid braveries, think of the 500 times you answer the same question because the person with you has memory problems, or the fact that you go to work every day and perhaps you're not appreciated, but you do it anyway because your family needs you to do it to give food and shelter to them. That's a very, very poignant, profound, important, high and splendid bravery. And the last would be in terms of speaking out, again, as Rona has encouraged us to do. When we hear something that we don't agree with or we know is factually wrong, in a civil and perhaps brief manner, please correct the record. So now I invite you to put your shoulders back, to take a deep breath in and out, and we'll say the pledge so that you have one more arrow in your quiver, as they used to say, one more thing to help you start the day off. I feel equal. So let's say it in parts. I feel equal. And now I ask you to say it.
I feel
To high and splendid braveries. Thank you. Now let's try saying it all together. So we're doing muscle memory. We're doing remembering in our heart so you can hear it in your soul. So let's say it all together again. I feel equal to high and splendid braveries. Shoulders back. Deep breath in and out. And now it's you taking the pledge. It's you saying you want to be a nation builder, that you want to be a trailblazer, that you're going to fight for justice. So shoulders back, deep breath. I'm going to count down from 5, and in a strong, clear voice, say your pledge. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, some of you did that with conviction. Others did not. So we need to try this one more time. Shoulders back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The legacy of the famous 5 is within you. Thank you again, Rona, Susan, and to Sophia. And now it's time to relish the song called Women that Brianna has written regarding Nellie's mock parliament. And thank you all for coming today, and see you on November 6th. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Brianna Burt from Saskatoon. I'm going to share with you a song I wrote for the musical The Famous 5. I envision Nellie McClung singing it, and she is holding a mock parliament disputing why men should have the vote. And in this song, I also have the men disputing why women should have the vote. And I called this song Women.
Women, how I love women, but who are these women who are on a mission? Ladies can't be politicians. They haven't got quite enough smarts or the right body parts to make decisions. Women, how I love women. My wife has opinions. It's only confusion. Kiss 'em. You won't have to listen. You've got to just keep on your toes with these clever does that we call women. Women will make it very clear you are wasting your breath and you don't belong here. Women have voices like you men. If you tell us we can't, we won't stop till we can. All right, men, you think you're the only ones who can play this game? You men, young men and old men, can't trust or believe them. Need women to lead them. Leave them at home, it's no question. Giving them rights is a joke. Men shouldn't vote in the election. Women, you men, how I love women. You don't know women. They're cooking and cleaning. I don't believe them. Their end and their beginning. Demeaning, playing, praying the game, and I'm winning. God stop me from sinning. If we let one woman in, well then they will win. There'll be a million. We've got to get one woman in, and I, gentlemen, will be the leader. If we let one woman in, we must listen to women.